Hello, 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 hello. Wonderful to see you all here at Art Forum. I am Kieran. I'm doing my best David Sequeira impersonation to introduce today's speaker. But first, I just want to acknowledge that we're meeting on the lands of the Wurundjeri of the Kulin Nation. And as we say every week, but I think it's really important, especially after recent events in our national psyche, it's that constant reminder that people have been meeting here long before us. We are just absolutely the newest on this land, and we have a great debt to the history, the long, long history of the Bunurong and Wurundjeri people who have met here before us and created and made songs and stories and shared and communicated. And yeah, it's really important for us to just continually acknowledge that. I want to introduce today our guest speaker, who is also my boss. So I do a really good job of this.
You know, they're my boss. That's really the truth.
Associate Professor Simone Slee makes works that has its origin in sculpture. She produces installations, photographs, videos, and sculptural objects that often engage the body and have a performance potential. Her practice investigates concepts of abfunction, a term that Simone coined as a generative move away from the concepts of function within the production and effect of artwork. Simone completed a PhD from the University of Melbourne, where she was awarded the Chancellors Prize for Excellence in 2018. She has attended the Staedelschule in Frankfurt in 2004 to 2006, and was after being awarded the Anne and Gordon Samstag International Visual Arts Scholarship in 2004. Currently, Simone has an exhibition, Light Times, at Heide Museum of Modern Art, which is amazing. You should all go out and see it. I had the joy of seeing that last week, which explores the notions of lightness and weight, pressure, compression and uplift, and the embedded sense of time in which it takes to hold things up or together. Very poignant for the times that we currently live in. And in case you didn't know, Simone is also the head of art here at the VCA. Can we please give a very warm welcome to Simone Slee?
Thank you very much, Kieran, and it's a great joy to be here. As Kieran mentioned, I'm Simone. I'm an artist and the head of art here. And it's a real treat for me to be able to talk about the show, Light Time, that's just opened in the last month at Heide, which is curated by Senior Curator Melissa Keys, who's here in the audience with me. Thank you, Melissa, for coming. It's a great joy to have you here. So this talk, initially, I just want to, as Kieran has done, I'd like to acknowledge the lands on which both we stand right now and the exhibition site and the project land on. And these are the lands of the Wurundjeri, Woiwurrung peoples. Those are the Eastern Ma peoples, the Boandak people, Wathaurong peoples, Gunta Jamara people, Yardwajali people, and the Dja Dja Wurrung peoples. And I really, as I will come to in a minute, would like to express my gratitude and thanks to Auntie Michelle Jacqueline Furr, who's a Boandik traditional owner of country and elder, who generously supported and provided advice on this project. And also just for those folk, again, I'd like to acknowledge this longevity of the First Nations contribution to all of these lands, caring for country, and how grateful I am to be a guest on their country. And I'd like to extend my gratitude and thanks and acknowledgement to all First Nations people that are here today, and that I will be using references to First Nations language that have been published by particularly Auntie Michelle Jacqueline Furr, and also that have been endorsed through local government as well. So thank you. So just I'm talking to slides, and actually we're going to be just working through quite a lot of images. And really the main function, what I wanted to show and share with you today, given that we're all in an art school, is really about the production of the project and the kind of research behind it. So initially I'll start with some of the conceptual underpinnings of the work, or actually before that I'll show a little bit of background work that led to the project, the conceptual underpinnings, then some of the making in the work, which you will see. It takes a lot of people to produce artwork and an exhibition such as this, and then there'll be some images of the exhibition as well. So just to position ourselves, knowing the land in which this project stands, and I mentioned it earlier, but I would just like to, actually, there probably is a pointer, but, actually maybe I could, can I do this, June? Yes, I can. Can you see this? Yes, okay. So first of all, and I'll go over this again a little bit later, but here we are in Melbourne on the Wurundjeri Woiwurrung country, and Heide is in this location. When we travel all the way across to the concept of light time really has to do with the ideas of lightness and weight, and also the idea of the sun and time, which is inherent in the work, but also it travels all the way across to Berrin, Mount Gambier, where the site of the house, the stone was sourced from. So just a little bit of background work to give you a sense, and Kieran kindly mentioned about the project and the works having a performative potential. This really stemmed from actually my art school days when I was here, where I really learned that actually I could mine what I was quite gifted at, and that was that my sculptures always failed and fell over. So this kind of concept of failure and performance has always, for a long time, been inherent in the work. And this is one of, this is one of the key works, Make a Sculpture, Watch It Fall Down, from 2005, that was exhibited at the Yoko Ono Dream Universe work. It really didn't become a sculpture until it collapsed. This led to other works such as the Prop series, where I had things like cucumbers holding up sculptures. And of course, when the cucumber began to fail, then the sculpture would collapse. There's a few funny stories about that, but I won't go into that now. Of course, this idea of duration and length also comes from prior works, such as How Long Can I Hold This Up, which is a work that I made which still continues actually, which started off as a kind of joke that humoured me about the idea of how long I could hold this placard up in various locations around the world where I happened to be. Later on, other works such as which people may have seen, Rock's Happy to Help, Hold Me Up, Hold Me Down. I became curious about the relationship of my own body as a prop in the kind of performance activity of what it is to make sculpture, and in this case within the environment on Dja Dja Wurrung land. What became curious when I began to reorient my understanding of the world in terms of which way's up is that it revealed more about gravity than I had previously understood. So these works really were quite essential. Later on, I was very fortunate to have a residency at Berlin Glass, and in fact, I think what you'll also see throughout this project is the relational aspect and the number of people. And this really came about because of my professor at the Staedelschule, Ayse Erkmen, suggested me to come and work with Nadania Indris at Berlin Glass. And this is where the idea of making works with rock and glass really solidified. And again, I guess one of the things I've always been curious about in the practice is the role of materials and what are the limits of materials, to what degree will they sustain themselves until that point of failure or imminent failure. I was also curious about the idea of glass being a matter that sandwiches of similar nature to things like rocks and stone. later on, many of you may have seen some of these key works that developed out of that particular residency. And I guess for those that are beginning their career in art, I just wanted to kind of demonstrate that things often start off as small seeds and then they begin to grow and consolidate through time. And actually making art is actually quite a durational activity in itself and has its kind of ebbs and flows throughout one's career. So you can see some of these, these works are from 2018, installations at Sarah Scout, which I'm very fortunate to be one of their artists. And you can see here a particular scoria rock that comes from Sunbury in the larger work up here, and then also an installation I made later that kind of keyed into the architecture of a hotel room at the establishment during one of the fairs. And it was really actually when I made this particular work, the one in the bathroom, that I really began to think about Heide Modern, because actually it's been a house that I've always adored, and having had a design background prior to coming to art school, I've always had a thing for modernism, in particular modernist space. So when the opportunity, and Melissa, one day I ran into Melissa, this little anecdote, at the grad show, and that's why it's always important to go to the grad show, because you'll meet all sorts of curators and fabulous people. She mentioned to me that she would like to do a show at Heide, and I said to Melissa, don't promise me something you can't deliver. That's always been a kind of dream, to be able to show in that particular space. So it was a great joy, and that's actually probably close on 3 years, and this project has taken about 2 years worth of work, which is why I was away for the last 7 months, and I'm fortunate Vicky and Kieran were acting head in my place. So of course, the research started with the house, and many people will be aware of Heide and of the culture that surrounded Heide with John and Sunday Reid, all the really remarkable artists like Sidney Nolan, Joy Hester, Albert Tucker, etc., and that kind of nexus of artistic inquiry that happened during the early 20th century and onwards. So, however, I was stepping back a little bit to think about the kind of country that this came from, and obviously Heide, which is out in Heidelberg, is on the lands of the Wurundjeri Woiwurrung people. And it's actually very close to a very central and important location for the Wurundjeri people, the Bolan Billabong, which in fact is one of the most important cultural gathering places for the Wurundjeri folk. I also, of course, went into the archives, which Heide House, and also in the State Library, to investigate the house. The house, of course, is designed by David McGlashan and Neil Everest. Their firm, McGlashan Everest, is a really significant modernist architectural practice that produced, I think Heide is really one of their most wonderful examples of modernist domestic / gallery examples. And there's been much written and much adored about this particular house. And in fact, many people think of it as one of the best examples in the country of modernism. There's a really wonderful sense of a vision for living. And that really also came from John and Sunday Reid's brief. I think David McGlashan said it was one of the most exciting briefs they have ever had to work with, and the most exciting clients. There was a very limited palette of materials, Berrin, Mount Gambier limestone, glass, timber, and leather. So, of course, my interest in materiality and also the nature of the materiality of the house really was something that galvanised and has always been of interest to me. There's conceits also in that building where ceilings seem to float, they seem to be held up with glass, and there's certain kind of parallels that I felt a real kinship with my own particular practice. It was also designed as this concept of a future ruin in the landscape, and one of the key concepts that really underpins a lot of modernism, particularly in housing, it is a kind of idea about a future way of living, and whilst, of course, it had a kind of vision, somewhat optimistically, that it could provide better ways of living for people through design, but but nonetheless had some problematics attached to it in terms of a kind of homogenized idea of who those people were, of course, and what types of space. So whilst there was an optimism, there's also an inherent kind of bias within this concept of modernism as well, which did very infrequently at that particular time register the differences in people. So having said that, the other thing I wanted to say about modernist housing is that there was always a very strong interest in bringing the outside in and the inside out. So that porosity between the architecture and what we in a Western concept understand as the landscape. And in some ways, this is really where the heart of my, the concept came from. And whilst I was reading about the house, in particular this essay by Peter Cohan, and you can see here's the original plan by McGlash and Everest, and some of the original photographs by Wolfgang Sievers from 1968. They did win an award, a Royal Australian Institute of Architecture Award in 1968 for this house. What's curious about the house, and I realise I'm going to have to move it along faster, is that whilst it has walls that go out into the landscape, it also blocks the landscape as well as invites the landscape it is. And so there's a kind of inherent contradiction. So really light time and this idea, from a Western point of view, there was the construction of the house, and then in Berent Mount Gambier, there is the void, like the carved hollow. And again, I just referred to this particular location previously. I will keep moving on that particular front. But actually I'm just going here. In terms of this idea of the house and light time, what was interesting to me was the idea that the house is also like a journey through a landscape, but equally this idea of light time, the sun orbiting around the house, kind of became a generative concept for the journey, in which I took back to Mount Gambier here. So I just would also like to say a little bit about my own positionality in reference to this and in reference to the landscape, because I did not grow up in the city. I did grow up from a farming background, and you'll see some of my relatives here who came out primarily during the kind of gold rush period, and then were share farmers, and then bought very small blocks of land. So these are both my parents and myself and my grandparents and great-grandparents on the country. And really, I was raised in what W.E.H. Stanner, the great anthropologist, calls the Great Australian Silence in the Boyer 1968 lectures. So a part of this is also about understanding my own positionality from that perspective, and the kind of gradual, awakening about whose land this actually is that we're working from. So there's two real parts to this. Well, as you know, I collect stone from quarries, and so along that journey from Melbourne to Mount Gambier, I went to operational quarries that are currently actually actively producing, often for actually agricultural purposes, and I would speak to quarry owners and select stone that would have been otherwise bound for the crusher or for construction purposes. In fact, you can see here on the left and the right, both quarries. They're both the quarries from Berent Mount Gambier. In fact, where the stone was literally sourced for the house at Heide Modern. And so here you can see this is me out there fossicking for stone. And there's a process where I would actually select stone. In fact, in many ways, the stone selects me when I'm out there. And I bring those stones back. And I was very fortunate to be able to, because my folks are still farming, I was able to kind of bring a lot of this stone back to their site, which is also on the way to Mount Gambier, to begin to kind of think about which stones needed to come together again after being separated through the quarrying process. As you might see, or I've noticed, a lot of these works I produce with the jam factory. So I carted 1.5 tons of stone with my artist husband, David Harley, across from some of them in Melbourne, but some of them from Lismore, which is on the lands of the Eastern Maar people, and work very closely with the glassblowers at the jam factory, in particular Drew Spangenberg, who's the head gaffer. You can see here working, and I work with them closely to direct the scale of the glass, where I'm also kind of then positioning the stone themselves. This particular project is where you can't really tell that well from these particular images. However, it's the largest scaled glass I've been able to blow to date, and probably at the limit that I can physically manage in terms of my own body. So some of the glass is, so large, and that also has limits. And I'm always very interested in working within the limits of production. There's limits in terms of how large the annealing kilns are once you've blown the glass and it has to cool down, and also the limits of how much one's body, such as Drew and the team, could hold as they're fabricating these particular works. So whilst the project meant that I was actually going out on site and really spending time in the country, and I was moving in production, I was also kind of going backwards and forth. And one of the key ideas that I had, which was really inspired by the driving that we did and also driving that I knew from having spent a lot of time on the road as a kid, is that kind of concept of the mirage on the edge. But this was also coupled with the idea of going back to the essay by Peter Cohan, where as the sun orbits around the building, it would also function, the building at Heide, it would function to keep the glare out, because one of the briefs, of course, for that house was for a house to live with art. So this idea, a kind of point of resistance, I was kind of not only keen to bring what the modernists would call the landscape back in, but what would it mean to bring country that it came from, to honour the country of the Bowendick people, where the quarry site, what would that mean as coming from a white settler background, to bring that back into the house, to acknowledge the way that matter and materials are quite diasporic. So there was that kind of concept as well. And just moving on to these particular ideas of the mirage and actually bringing the glare back into the house, I began to work on a series of photographic images with the rocks, with this concept in mind. And I was really fortunate to work with Christo Crocker, who you all know exceptionally well, most likely. So Christo always takes my documentation for my own particular work. And so this is some background imagery of Christo and I working in a range of places. I have one studio, but actually really the studio as the artist studio for me always exists in places that happen to become available for me. So often that's out on the road or working at the jam factory. And in this particular instance, I was in a home that was in between being sold. So I was able to access a particular space there. So it was actually completely brilliant. I had the concept and I worked really closely with Christo, who's kind of a magician, really, and we worked to produce these works where there was a lot of playing and working with light. Later on, you'll see these in the exhibition as I move forward. So there was 4 images that I produced. I produced more work than actually you see in the exhibition. So again, just significantly more traveling. I just wanted to spend a little bit of time, again, just thinking about the land, the geology of this place that I was drawing the stone from. And here you can see, not sure if you really understand this plan, but the V is for volcano. The volcanic plain really starts from Mount Gambier and flows all the way to Melbourne. And at the same time, in Mount Gambier, bearing Mount Gambier, which is right over on the far left, it's also a limestone bed coast from 450,000 years ago. And this is the country, and I was very fortunate. I reached out to Auntie Michelle Jacqueline Furr, who is, as I mentioned earlier, is a Bowendick elder and traditional owner of the Boandic country. And she kindly shared, this is her publication of her great-grandmother, Annie Bryce, and the country on which she lived. The information about this is also at the Heide at the reception desk as well. Here she's kind of shared through this publication particular names of the sites. So there was a great deal of travel with this particular project. So here these are images of what this place appears like. So this is what this limestone country on the left, when you're standing on the top of Mount Shank, one of those 5 volcanic cones called Perrine in Boandic language. The very famous Wawa Blue Lake from Berrin, Mount Gambier. And actually I took this photograph. Mount Gambier is not far from the coast, a limestone coast. So I took this photo for Raf actually, because Raf, in one of those wonderful kind of synchronicities, Raf had a beautiful show, and you'll see another image of his work at the Heide Modern House in 2023, where he had a camel. So this is called the Camel on the coastline of Mount Gambier, not far from Mount Gambier. So whilst I was out there, simultaneously while I was looking at the country and thinking about sites that may be appropriate to video to bring back into the site, I was simultaneously also keeping in mind the place of the house and the sensitivities to the way there was a particular journey through the house. And I'm not sure if I mentioned it before, but one of the things that struck me about the house is that it really is like a bushwalk in many ways. There's a kind of, you can see here, there's many paths. There's this spiraling, what I'll say first, there's these spiraling walls without doors in the house, and you're taken on a journey through the house. So there's passages and bridges, there's walls, there's particular spaces as you move through, unexpected kind of nooks and crannies. And then as you go into there's the sunken haiku/conversation pit, views and vistas out, and then these spectacular limestone walls, which are akin to cliffs. And then you would go underneath into cave-like spaces within the kitchen. So whilst I was out there, I was keeping in mind this journey. I was also keeping in mind some of the key spaces that really I wanted to kind of echo in the work. So again, as I mentioned, the cliff wall of the limestone in the dining room, and the cliffs that I'd seen both at Finger Point, which is just on the coast, down there near Mount Gambier, of the quarry, which is the other side, and then also thinking about my own body as a white woman and the kind of tenuous relationship that we have and the fragile relationship of what is it that holds us up. So I was thinking about these kinds of things. Again, I was thinking about, it's another example of the sunken lounge room, the famous fire pit. This idea of fire and the transformation and the kind of coloration really began to also generate some of the ideas for the work. And you can see one of the images here. Here also again is the this compressed space. I was very keen on this compressed quality of the kitchen and wanted to somehow register that in the final work. And of course, sorry to do this to Raf again, there was this brilliant work he made, which didn't do the same thing as I was interested in, the compression, but there was certainly a sense of reinforcing the scale of that space with this contrast between the big and small with his work, Apparition of a Miserable Acquaintance from 2023. I think with every show you make, there are often echoes, not just of your own work, but of what generates it, but of works and exhibitions that have gone before you. So we did several trips, and in fact, the last trip I went out there just after Christmas during that incredible week when the country, Victoria, was on fire. I was really, I worked with Max Davis, who's a wonderful cinematographer, on a prior exhibition, and he agreed to come out with my husband David and artist David Harley and myself, where we went out and we selected some particular sites, and I worked closely with Max to produce some video works. But one of the things that I did before, once I'd chosen those sites, and I'd had conversations with Auntie Michelle about these particular sites, I confirmed with her that these were sites that were appropriate to film. So there's a lot of consultation around that. As you would know, and we don't, as you may know, in terms of places on that's Crown land. This is the country of First Nations people, and there are some sites which are understood to be, which are registered as protected Aboriginal sites. That information isn't always available to the public unless you request that information. So it's important that one goes through this particular process to ensure that the sites that you're filming or that you're working in, that you're not sort of contravening any First Nations protocols. So Auntie Michelle gave her blessings to use these particular works, and I produced, how are we going for time? 3 new video works, which I'll show you in a minute in the install space, but one was out at Finger Point, which is the balancing work on the limestone cliff, and a video work called Sky Hold Up in the what's called in Boandik language, luangs, which are water holes, otherwise in English understood as sinkholes, which is a very curious and interesting aspect of that limestone country, where over millions of years with the limestone, which as you would know is all comes from a marine context, with fossilized shells and etc., fish, marine life, is that the water will trickle through over time, over millions of years, and erode the all of the kind of fossils, and then it'll erode so far down that actually there'll be the ground will drop, and you would have heard of the phenomena of sinkholes. That whole country is actually full of caves underneath all the farming and townships as well. And then also a new video work called 450,000 Year Revolutions and More, which is the facade of the quarry that the house was built from, and a tree that exists on the edge. So I just thought I'd show a little bit about some of the thinking around the installation. And whilst this presentation gives you the impression that maybe I went out and made all the work and then I thought about the installation, as I think Melissa will attest, I was always thinking about the installation from the get-go. And really the house for me became a type of plinth, and then I produced what you might call plinths as support structures in which to both insert the sculptures and also to kind of highlight the conditions of the architectonics of the space. So very early on, these are some of the mock-ups that I did on the left and drawings where I began to think about these steel structures as kind of, well, I called them kind of back to front Cs, but they were kind of with a cuff over the existing structure. So that's a handrail and a kind of steel cuff, which then this steel would kind of leverage off. And there was a kind of typology, if you could say, of steel support systems that I inserted into the building. And this was one of them. You can see the kinds of drawings I produced here. You'll see her later, the really incredible Simone tops from Studio Tops fabricate these with such beautiful precision, which is really one of the great highlights of the show. This was another type of format for this C-shape structure, which then lent onto existing systems like the desks. Another example of that was working into some of the furniture, and I brought the bed back. This is the bed and this again is a mock-up in Photoshop. David McGlashan designed a range of furniture for the house, and this is the bed that John and Sunday Reid used. So there's yes, again, this kind of C structure and the landing and the cuff on the bed head. Here's just a photograph of me. This is working with Simone, where we tested. These sculptures, as I mentioned before, some of the heaviest that I've made, they're up to 120 kilos. So some of that glass is supporting up to 40 kilos in weight. So it was really important that we did a lot of testing behind to ensure that the steel thickness and the rigidity of the steel would support the sculptures themselves. So here we are in Simone's studio, testing it with a bunch of rocks, and then the powder coating process. And then later on, as I was thinking through the logic of the artwork and the videos and keying into the sites, this sinkhole / which became the sky hole video work, I inserted into the kitchen, again, interested in that compression and that cave-like space, and looking at what happens and what is revealed when that particular video work is turned upside down. And then also with the cliff work, echoing that in the foreground. We're going for time. Okay, we need to move on. Install. Here's the install. So lots of people, lots of wondrous people that worked on that install, including Simone Tops, some people that you know very well, Nicholas Smith, Carly Fisher, Eric Zhong. Oh, there's Melissa and me looking very tired. Fashions. And now I'm just going to show you some of the final images and some of the video works before we finish up. So again, I just want to reiterate the kind of passage through the site and the unveiling of different works as you move through. So this is at the entry point, and then you can see the reception. The reception actually is stone from, it's called Grampian / or Gerryweg Grampian sandstone that's on a fault line on the way between here and Mount Gambier, just at the south of the Grampians, Gerryweg. I probably won't speak too much to these, but you can just see these images. This is the bedroom. And the window works. Here's the bathroom. I think in a lot of the plinths, I'm also interested in going back to that abfunction idea, the idea how you can reveal something by actually stopping it from working in some ways or blocking it. And I guess this is what I was interested in with the vanity work in the bathroom and to some degree within the shower. This is the haiku space and the mezzanine. And here, as you pass the conversation pit, there's the vista down to the video. This is, again, another one of the mirage photographs, also called Light Time. And this is a very large-scale photograph. It actually takes up the entire space of the powder room. So, again, kind of highlighting the scale of the space by the size of the photographic work. Now, here's just to give you a bit of glimpse. It's going to work, Jean. Oopsie. I haven't spoken too much about this, but this is a rotation. Which rotates, this slow rotation that rotates around the space for, there's kind of 8-minute duration between each rotation, but it rotates endlessly. When I went out there, actually, I had this idea. I wanted gorgeous, big blue, sunny skies. And I think this is such a classic sculptural problem. And in fact, when we went out there, it was that week when Victoria was on fire. Curiously, when we arrived in Mount Gambier, by the time 3 o'clock hit, a cool change came through, and then it never got hot again. in that period. So we were fighting with extraordinary winds and cloud. And in fact, that is the landscape. So I really had to kind of work with what the landscape was, which is really water, sky, and clouds. This is the laundry space. And then as we return back to the final space, and I was really fortunate, Heide and I, we hosted Auntie Michelle, Jacqueline Furr, to come and see the work. And I'm really delighted that I'll be able to return the work to Mount Gambier, to Red Oak Space, so that the work that was made from that place is able to return to that place in the future next year. And I'll just end there and with a list of all the fabulous people that were involved in this project, and we'll open it up for questions. So thank you.
Thank you so much, Simone, for that. It's an amazing insight to be able to go through a whole process, which is not just the process of this project for a couple of years, but how it connects all the way back to kind of in your practice, and how those things that come across in your practice at some point, you don't know where they're going to end up. And years later, it grows into something else, which grows into something else, which grows into something else. Amazing to be taken across that journey. So thank you very much.
It's a pleasure.
Can I open the floor to questions? Actually, I can. Are there any questions from the floor that anyone would like to ask?
Hi, Rhonda.
That amazing flexible group that you do all this dancing on. What is that? You know, like you look like an actor.
What is it? I don't know that I want to tell you. So like, I mean, look, I can tell you. It's actually, I always wonder about how much to reveal or not to reveal. It's a wooden band. Yeah.
Perfect. Great. Getting secrets out already. Keep that going.
Only some I will reveal. I am happy. I have revealed that before. It's a wood band that I make. It's actually quite dumb. Like when you see it, it looks quite dumb in the sense that, you know, there's certain materials that have a dumbness to them in its actual physical materiality. That's not to say it's not great. It just has that kind of quality in the way that cardboard is quite mute.
Lisa?
Lisa. I'm good at dumb materials.
But so you spoke a lot about like how the exhibition was conceived and its relationship between Heide and like space and place. But the glass,
yeah,
because I often think about it as like like a fart of air, or between the rocks, like so there's a kind of humour and like ripple shorter the chop that's on one of the rocks. So there is kind of still that cucumber in the work.
There's still the.
Tell us about the glass.
Yeah, sure. And look, it is true. I really focused on the making and the process and thinking about how rocks really bring with them. I think one of the things that struck me about this work, I just couldn't believe the rock and glass work would be so successful, frankly, because I've never had that. People seem to really respond to that. And I think it's because it's nothing to do with me. It brings a place with it. And I think that and time with it. And I think that really touches people. However, it is also very funny. I mean, my works have always had a sense of humour in them. Oh, well, I don't know. I don't try, but they just, the kind of issues of when things might collapse or not, the idea of air and breath. I mean, on the one hand, it's very poetic, but it's also very funny because it is like a fart. And also all of those works get people to do weird things. I don't try, but suddenly there's people wanting to stick their finger in the hole. I've had small children wanting to blow in them. They actually activate something in one's body, which is sort of silly, which I kind of adore. And with the work with the band, my cousins' children were all busy kind of bending over going, Simone, how long did you stay up there for? And of course, I wasn't going to reveal that to them. So there's always some kind of curious thing, the way, and I'm interested in the way objects activate actions in people.
So they've given the titles and it's 450,000 years or 8,000
Yeah.
years.
To the geology. Yeah. Look, it's not, I wouldn't call it scientifically accurate, and I haven't done any carbon dating. However, based on the kind of geological maps, they have to do with the duration. So those volcanoes in the barren Mount Gambier region are incredibly young, like 5,000 to 8,000 years old. And it's in Auntie Michelle's stories talk about those volcanic eruptions.
Yeah.
You're inverting the landscape correctly. Interests me.
Yeah. Yeah, it's kind of like when I first started inverting things, I was a bit skeptical about the idea, because I'm always skeptical about doing something that creates a trick or an effect, because I was always wanting to be really honest. You know, I wanted the materials to be honest. I wanted the kind of silliness to be honest. However, when I did do it, I found that actually it wasn't so much a trick, but revealed more than what I'd previously seen. So particularly those early works where I'm balancing on the timber, I realised it actually revealed the kind of space became a positive, and it revealed the kind of gravitational forces, even though it's a total conceit. And then it was like, well, actually, which way is up really? In fact, you know, which way is up? And what is up is not necessarily what we assume it to be. And even like the optics of the eye, there's a kind of thing that happens in our brain, which is always, I mean, we all know this is nothing kind of that's not known to people. So I'm interested in that. And then when I again turned this sinkhole upside down to produce the sky hole video, what was astonishing, which I really enjoyed when I was videoing it, was the way it not only captured the sky, but the kind of wind across the surface was like a streaming, filling, it was like an energy filling me, the viewer, or filling the viewer. So, and in a way, this is the first time I've been more in this particular show. And then with the video going around of the tree with the quarry wall, I've been much more kind of upfront about that, the way the earth moves around the sun.
Thanks. We've got time for one more question up the back there.
Sure. I'm going to say this, and then Melissa can tell you if I've been telling you the truth. We started talking really early on, and I remember thinking, after this daft idea, Melissa, so I'd ring her up and chat about it. And I had a lot of problems thinking, like, I always have a lot of problems, and the wrestling with the concepts. What does it mean for a white woman who's come from a settler farming family in the bush, who's come out of that? What does that mean, you know, if I'm working with these materials that are also on the land, in the land, that actually has First Nations, profound First Nations legacy, because it is unceded country, it is their country. So I would often ring up Melissa, and she'd kindly, patiently listen to me as I began to work through those things. Really early on, I was sending Melissa, honestly, this is about 5 or 6 different versions on. Like I would send through ideas, I'd send through what was going to go in the lounge room was quite different initially. And she was always incredibly open, going, yes, yes, yes. And actually, as it evolved, she'd go, yes. And then things would sort of slide away. So it was really an ongoing and really wonderful, rich conversation. So I've been incredibly fortunate to work with such a brilliant curator who had such trust in me. I really wouldn't trust me myself. So, you know, I was very fortunate. Is that fair to say, Melissa? It's a conversation.
Thank you.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you, Simone. Again, just thank you so much. Let's do it one more time. Yeah, I really appreciate the conversation, Simone, like that generosity in speaking with us and revealing behind the scenes to us all. It kind of reflects in the work. So thank you very much.
Well, yeah.
Encourage you all to go out there and see it if you haven't already.
And just to also, it's not just me that this show. There's just so many people along the way, and like I've had great support from also Sarah Scout Presents. So that's been great. With
Yes, read that list.
Kate
We'll leave it there for 10 minutes. You can all
and
take
Vicky.
note.
Thank you.
Look, thanks all for coming. I imagine there is an art forum next week. I'm not in charge, so I don't know who's speaking. I don't know who it is, but just be here anyway for the magic of it.
Thank you.